Hey everyone, and welcome to Lightroom with Chris Orwig today. I'm going to be your host. This is Joe Brady. I'll just be answering some questions in the background, and I'm here to help out Chris. So we're going to go over a little mechanics first, just to let you guys know, because a lot of people have already asked, yes, this is being recorded. So if you have to leave or some reason you lose connection, no worries. We'll have the recording posted, and as soon as it is posted, we'll send out an email to everybody so that you can view it at your leisure. And I'm sure that Chris is going to cover a lot of cool stuff that you're going to want to review, so the recording will be really valuable for that. So welcome to everybody, and let me introduce Chris real quick because I know he wants to get things started. He's got a lot for us today. Chris is a phenomenal, celebrated photographer. He's an author and educator. He's based in Santa Barbara, California. In fact, Chris, some people have asked. We all know how terrible weather is always out there. He was on the faculty of Brooks Institute for 12 years. He's the author of 5 best-selling books. And the thing that I find absolutely amazing, above and beyond this, is he's got over 70 online courses available on lynda.com. I've got one, and I'm about to start my second, and I realize how much work it is. I can't even comprehend what it's like to have 70 courses up there. So I don't want to waste any more time. I want to get Chris started. So Chris, welcome. It's so great to have you with us today.
Yeah, Joe, super exciting to be here and fun to get to do this with you. As I mentioned to you earlier, I love your teaching and watching what you do, so it's fun to get to do this together.
So carry on. The screen is yours.
Okay, here goes. So what I wanted to do, and thanks you guys for joining, what I wanted to do is to cover essentially 5 topics. So I want to give you a little bit of a roadmap of what I'm going to get into. And so we have a sense of where it's going and maybe what you'll find is relevant, and then we'll dig in. So quickly, the first topic is looking at Lightroom from a perspective of batch processing. Second topic is looking at how we can use a ColorChecker Passport, and I want to take a little bit of a different slant or angle on using that tool. Then third, I'm going to introduce this whole idea of Lightroom Mobile, which has just been released this week, and then we'll look at how we can actually use that, a little bit of workflow in regards to Lightroom Mobile. And then the fifth and final topic is doing some more workflow in Lightroom Desktop and taking an image kind of start to finish and going through it in its entirety. So that's what we have ahead of us, and with that, I'm going to jump over to Lightroom and dive right into my first collection of images. And in this case, these are some photographs that I captured for a client in Big Sur, and it was one of those trips that was wonderful, you know, and the client says, hey, will you go with some people to Big Sur for a few days? I say yes before checking my calendar, kind of a thing. And I'm just going to click through these pictures. Let me go back here to click through them. And I asked some of these characters, some friends, to just walk out on this cliff as the sun was setting. And what I was looking to do is to try to capture a moment. And so you can kind of see I'm not quite getting it in every frame, but I'm trying, I'm scratching, I'm digging. And when you go to Lightroom and review your pictures, at least what happens to me is often I'll look at them and realize they're not as good as the experience. The sunset was so much better. And so what I want to do is kind of bring some of that out. So again, just some pictures. They're not all great, but before I even get through them, I'm going to try to find one that I think might have something to it. Like this one here. I think this is kind of a good moment. And so I'll try to process that and then batch process the other ones, because I find I can't really evaluate the other ones if they're not looking good. So in this case, jump to the Develop module, and I'll click on that tab up top or press the D key to do so. When it comes to sunsets, there's some stuff I'll do in the basic panel, but then the magic happens in split toning, at least for me. I also am shooting directly into the sun. In this case, I'm using a 70 to 200 millimeter lens. I'm pretty far away from these people. So I'm going to press J to just check exposure, and that middle area is obviously overexposed, so I'm going to drop that down, maybe with highlights is an easy way to do that. And then I'll press J again to turn off that indicator. So that's, you can either click on the little icons or just press the J key to turn both of those on. All right, next, I love contrast, so I'm going to bring that in, and maybe exposure I think is okay, darken up my blacks, and that's probably it for here. Maybe a little bit of color temperature becoming warm, but not too much. With sunset, I find that vibrance and saturation aren't your best friends. You know, if I bring up vibrance, it's going to help, or saturation, but it's not that great. So again, I'm going to jump down to split toning. And in split toning, you can target your highlights and shadows. And with the highlights, I want them yellow. And there's the trick of, you can move the slider and have a little bit of saturation and kind of see your different colors, but it's hard to see what color you have. But if you hold down Option or Alt and drag the slider, then you see it at full saturation. So here I'm going to hold down Option Mac, Alt Windows, and then drag the little slider till I find a yellow that I think is nice. I like that one. Let go of Option, and what that will do is it will drop the saturation back to whatever the slider is. And then here maybe find the right amount of yellow. Shadows, I'm going to want a lot in my shadows and probably a lot of red. So actually right where it's at is most likely going to be good. And again, I'm just looking to try to bring some magic back to this image. To open up a little more space so we can see this, because I know it gets kind of small, I'm just going to close the panel on the left for a moment and then minimize my thumbnails below too, just so we have a little bit bigger view of the photo. Backslash key, that's the one in the develop module that shows you before and then after. I remember that one by clicking the backslash key and saying, I'm going back in time. What did I do before? Here's before, then here's after. And so in this case, the image isn't finished, but for me it's a really important place so I can actually start to process and think about the other images. Are they good or bad? So a couple things here. One is you go to the next image, and it's a letdown, of course, but you can use, I like how Matt Kloskowski calls it, one of the best buttons in Lightroom, which is the previous button. And if we click on that, it will apply whatever settings we had on the previous image that we viewed. This image, I think it's pretty cool. It's a pretty fun moment. And we can also hop around. For example, if we click on another image in our thumbnail, we can hit previous, and it will go to whatever those previous settings are. You don't have to be going forward in a straight line in order to apply the settings that way. Another thing in regards to batch processing that we can do is we can select one image and then hold down the Shift key and select a group by clicking on an image down the line here. And what I'm going to do is turn off auto sync and just use sync. And when sync pops up, we can choose what we want to sync. In this case, I'm going to sync everything because I haven't done a lot to these images, but I'll just sync. It will include the basic stuff and then also split toning. We'll hit synchronize, and that will then process all those images that way. And by doing that, you just will now have a better insight and ability to be able to evaluate them. And once you've selected the keepers and whatnot, you won't have to process them. So when you ever have those groups of photos shot in a similar way, got to start batch processing. All right, one or two more little tricks here. I have all these images selected. To deselect in Lightroom, it's Shift-Command-D on a Mac, Shift-Control-D on Windows. I like that shortcut because it just gets rid of everything and goes back to one image, and then I can go down the line, or I can use the arrow keys to scroll through until I find something. I think this is kind of a fun photograph here as well. All right, so there's a little bit on workflow and batch processing. There's obviously more we could get into with that, but just to review, to think through what we did, we looked at first processing one image using some basic controls, and then also using some split toning. After having done that, we then looked at how we can move from one image to another and press the previous button to apply the previous settings. And then next we explored how we can select a group of photos and synchronize all the settings across those pictures. All right, you guys ready to jump to the next topic? Here goes. I'm going to bring back some of the Lightroom interface and talk about another topic, and that's the topic of using the ColorChecker Passport. The ColorChecker Passport, I think, has been around, I want to say 5 years or something like that. And so it's been around for a while. And hopefully you're using it. If you aren't, it's one of those tools I think you almost kind of have to use. I'm not a color perfectionist, as a lot of people kind of talk about color in that way. I think of myself more as a color expressionist. And what I mean by that is that I like to try to use color to express something, and sometimes that means the color needs to be perfect, but I'm always more interested in expression. And so for me, using the ColorChecker Passport is a really important part of the game, because it's equivalent to tuning my guitar before I play it. And it just gives me that good tune so I can create music that sounds good, and I can get creative with what kind of music I'm going to make. So for me, this is all about tuning the guitar, and that's it. And so I have 4 little folders. The first one is just kind of thinking through the idea of how do you integrate this into the shoot. Because as I started to use this, and as I have over the years, I found that there are different ways that it makes sense to use it. The first one is in the sense of sort of just documenting your setup. And this was a shoot from a couple days ago. And in this case, I'm just documenting the lighting in the setup, and then get the color checker in there, and then get closer. I always like to have multiple shots of the color checker in case one doesn't work or read well. I find that can be pretty helpful. And you may be thinking too, okay, so how does all of this work? Well, what you do, if you aren't familiar with this tool, is you shoot a frame in the lighting situation that you have, in this case the light like we have here. Then you go to File and you choose Export. I should also say you have to install the software that comes with it. You can download that pretty easily. And in your export settings, it will show up here that you can just minimize those guys. You can export the ColorChecker Passport. You write the profile name, whatever you want it to be, Studio One or something like that, and then click Export. It takes a couple minutes or maybe about a minute for that to take place, so I'm not going to export it here, but just before we went on, I did this to kind of highlight how this works. What you do is you export it, then you need to shut down Lightroom, reopen it. Then in the Develop module, you can head over to your Camera Calibration tab, and you have a Profile pull-down menu up here. And what you can do is from the menu, you can select the profile that you've created. In this case, let me zoom in on this so you can see this better. Sorry about that. You can see this is the Adobe standard one, and then this is the one that I created. And you can kind of see the subtle differences in these colors right here. Or if we want to go to an image, let's say we'll go to our first setup here. You can see here's with that. Let me zoom in so you can see the background perhaps a little bit there. Here's the Adobe standard. You can see the blue is a little bit faint there. Then the studio profile that I created for this lighting scenario helps make that pop. And so again, it's just like tuning the guitar, fine-tuning it so that when you play the chord and you start getting to expression, you're that much closer. So anyhow, this first little piece is, one, how do we create the profile? But two, thinking, how do you integrate it into the shoot? One way I do that is just saying, hey, I want to document the set, and I also want to do that to get good color, so I have the subject hold it. One of the things I don't like doing is having my assistant walk into the frame and hold this really close to the person, because I find that can kind of affect the portraits I'm able to create. I always like to have the person hold it. And you ideally want to have it held upright, so what that means is that the little faces, your heads, are facing up, and you don't want them to touch any of these, just to make sure that those stay good. The second way you might want to integrate it into it, or something I do, is in the middle of a shoot. So here I've been shooting for a while, it wasn't happening, finally got a couple good images, and then I said, well, hey, let's bring this in, make sure my color's good, and then keep on shooting. So it can happen before we shoot, or sometimes it can happen somewhere along the middle as well. Another way that I like to do this is propping it up somewhere. So this was just on the rooftop, and there are these interesting sort of beams here. And it wouldn't really make sense to have the subject holding it in this spot, so I just propped it up somewhere and took a photo of it in the lighting environment that I was in. So again, integrate the tool into a way that makes sense with your workflow. There's no right or wrong, beginning, middle, or even end. Sometimes I'll do it after I've shot, because I don't want to interrupt the connection with the subject, because for me, connection is super important. All right, last little tip here is cropping. In this case, the ColorChecker Passport's held incorrectly for this set of photographs. In this case, I was just trying to shoot it before. And so what I'm going to do with something like this is try to run, to export it, and it won't be able to read it. And so often you'll need to crop in. And in Lightroom, the shortcut for the crop tool is the R key. And what you can do is you can crop in way into this little guy here, even though it's that small. And sometimes it's also helpful to rotate. If you control click on the image, you can choose transform and then click over to, wait, rotate left, sorry. Rotate left, so now this is upright. I could even crop in further maybe. But with this particular set of photographs, I wasn't able to get a profile generated until I cropped way into it. And it'll give you a little warning message telling you, hey, you might need to crop in. But just want to highlight that. You can crop and rotate, and sometimes that will help you out when working with these profiles. And again, if you aren't a perfectionist, like I'm not, maybe you're an expressionist. You're like, how do I use color? How do I express things? How do I have good skin tones as a good starting point? Well, this, I think, is a great way to do it. So there's sort of topic number 2 in what we're hitting today. I want to jump to topic number 3, which is talking about Lightroom Mobile. And to do that, I'm going to jump to a slide here and just zoom in on that. And Lightroom Mobile was introduced this week, and for me, it is seriously a game changer. And I've been working with the tool, I think, for 2 months now, just when I was working with it as a beta. And the reason why it's a game changer is because Lightroom's been out, I think 7 years is what it is. And for the last 7 years, it meant laptop or desktop. But as we all know as photographers, tablets are becoming more and more important. I always felt like Lightroom was kind of missing the boat. Like, what's going on? How come we can't take advantage of this? So now we can. And what it is it's kind of an extension of Lightroom Desktop. And I like to think of it this way. It's maybe a bit off the wall, but stick with me. I think of it kind of comparing it to biking. So I'm going to say Lightroom Desktop is like me riding my road bike. It's really good for long distance, road rides. If you want to do a century ride, I grab the road bike, right? And so it's really reliable, it's really fast, it's really lean, it's really mean, but it's also limited. If I want to go into the mountains, which I love, I have to reach for a mountain bike. And mountain biking is a ton of fun. It's still biking, but you're in a different posture, and that posture makes you notice things, and you're also kind of exercising and exerting energy and all this stuff in a different way. So I find that's true with Lightroom Mobile as well, because sometimes it's helpful to get away from your computer screen and sit on a couch or be in a coffee shop and review images. So you're a little less, less in computer mode and more in just beautiful photographs mode and being able to evaluate them. The way it works is in Lightroom, I'll show you this in just a second, but you target collections that you want to synchronize. These are synchronized via the Creative Cloud, and what's sent over is a smart preview. If you have used Lightroom for a while, you know that smart previews are these smaller versions of the files which still give us flexibility to make adjustments to them using the develop module. So we can still do a lot of that. We can do things like view, flag, develop, or process, and share the pictures. Right out of the gate, it's important to keep in mind this is version 1.0. It isn't perfect. It isn't the solution for everything, but it is good, and I think it will get a lot better. And really, it's all about this ability to sync the settings between the devices, which kind of makes it so good. So you can have a collection, send it over to the iPad, make a change here. That change is sent back to your desktop computer, whether it's a laptop or a desktop. I just used a laptop for the slide purpose. But so again, there's this connection between the two. So work you do in one place shows up the other, and vice versa. So it's a seamless workflow. So for me, in my studio, grab the iPad, walk out into the couch, do some work there, come back to the laptop, and it's there. All right, well, let's take a look at how this works. To do that, what I'm going to do is wake up my iPad here just for a second, and then I'm going to go ahead and we'll take a look at that. 1 minute. And this will just queue up here. All right. All right. Well, with, okay, sorry about that. Just had to get this dialed in. So with the iPad, you can see that we have some photographs, and these are collections of images. And these collections have been targeted in Lightroom, and I'll show you how to do that in a moment. And so I said, hey, I want to target, say, this collection of some of these pictures which we looked at. And we can see that I had made some changes on some of them that we just did previously. Those changes now show up here. If I were to go into this picture to crop it, I'm going to click on, or tap, I should say, on the far icon in the bottom right corner. If I decide to crop this image, I'm going to do so just by changing the crop there. That crop would then show up on my desktop. So again, it's this really connected workflow. And what you can do is on the home screen, you can scroll through the different collections that you have. To view photos in one of the collections, you tap it, and that takes you into this view, which is kind of like the grid view, where you can go through the images. To view a single image, you tap that image, and it goes into this larger view. As you get to use this tool, you'll find there's a lot of different ways to tap. So you can single tap, and that will hide things in this case. Single tap again, it brings it back. Two-finger tap brings up more information on top of the image. You can see the lens that was used, and then also the histogram there. You can also do things like put two fingers on the screen and expand them or pinch them together. So I'm doing this to zoom in and zoom out on the photograph as well. Navigating to other pictures, you can do so by swiping across the screen. So I'm just going to swipe through a few photographs. Or you can click on the far left icon and you get a film strip below, and then here we can choose a picture in order to view it. And in this case, what we'll do perhaps is let's go back to this dog photo, and let's say we want to change the way it looks. So the next button, if we tap on it, this is in the lower area of the interface, we have the ability to do things like let's just change the white balance here. And so you can see that I could change the white balance in order to warm it up. We could change the color temperature. There's a slider that allows you to drag that around. And you can do other things as well, like I can modify the exposure and change settings like that. So there are some controls, as you can see in the base here, which are a lot of the most important controls in the Develop module for processing your photographs. If you want to undo what you've done, you can do that as well. So you can just click to undo the changes. So there's a few undo buttons down below. The next button allows you to access different effects or colors, presets. And so here we could go through and say, well, what if we cross-process this image? This gives us a view of how we might do that. I don't really like it with this photograph, so I'll click Reset to bring that back to where it was. So Lightroom Mobile, pretty exciting. It's a neat way to begin to view and work with your pictures. The other thing perhaps I should highlight as well when we find a photograph is that you can swipe and you can make selections. So say, hey, this is a keeper. And this is a great way to be in that coffee shop and just say, hey, these are the photos that I want to work on. The way that it works is it's sending over smart previews, so you need to have an internet connection. If you know that you're going to go offline, and let's say that you want to work on this set of photographs here, well, what you can do is you can choose to enable offline editing. One of these menu items, the middle one, says enable offline editing. That would actually download the photos to your iPad. So if you were going to go on an airplane, you could then work on the images. And then when you got back to a Wi-Fi connection, it would resynchronize the settings across all the files. So pretty fun stuff. Let's jump to Lightroom to take a look at how this works from that side of the equation, from Lightroom Desktop. To do that, let me jump back there. So over here in Lightroom Desktop, we have some of these photographs. Let's go to this one here, where this is a collection of pictures that we just viewed. And one of the images was this dog photo. We can see that it has all the same process settings that I had on the iPad. If I hold the iPad up next to my screen, it looks identical. And this is synchronized because of this little checkbox right here. It's a little teeny checkbox to the left of your collections. You need to sign in to the service. It is a subscription service. You sign in by navigating to this area. I've signed in with my just normal Adobe login info and whatnot. And I imagine by just showing Lightroom Mobile, there are all these other questions. There may be some other questions from some of the other content I've covered. So Joe, I thought it might be worthwhile to take a minute to see if there are any questions. And then if not, I'll just keep going to some
Yes,
other
Chris, there are a
topics.
bunch of questions. I haven't been able to listen to much of what you've been saying because I've been furiously typing continuously. So, one bit of confusion about profiles. There are some folks confused
Yeah.
about the difference between a color profile with the Passport and white balance. How are they different? How do they work together? That kind of thing. If you want to answer that, or I can even answer it. It's up to
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Maybe we both can answer that. But so great question. So I'm going to give a stab at it, Joe, and then maybe we can both do it together. But white balance is really arbitrary. So you're just saying, hey, I'm just doing this. I may be changing it, or I'm using my eyedropper and sampling something that I think should be neutral. Maybe even sampling something on the color checker chart for that matter. So that's one way to do it, right? You could go to this little thing and you could use your white balance tool and do that. What the profile is doing is the software program is actually analyzing all of the color chips that we have here. And it's saying, in this lighting situation, what's happening to the color? Then how can I correct and get the most out of it and make that color, which what I'm going to call is kind of tuned, going to that musical example of like, it's like I want to tune the guitar not just to some arbitrary thing, but I'm going to tune it like a piano tuner does. They have a tuning fork. They hit on the table and it goes bing, whatever. I'm going to tune it to the tuning fork. I want to make sure this is right, not just right kind of in an arbitrary way. Joe, how did I do
Yeah,
on
no,
that? What do you
it's a
think?
valid way, and we were chatting earlier before everybody joined us, and this kind of also illustrates why it's good to listen to courses and get some education from different people because we all have different ways of explaining things, and eventually you'll hear it from someone, and you'll have that light bulb go off and say, "Oh, now I get it." So, one other thing that I would point out is that white balance is you are setting a neutral. You're saying this is neutral, and yes, it can be arbitrary. But if you use the color checker, then technically any of the gray patches would work. Lighter is better, but that's
Right.
okay. The problem is that every
Yeah.
camera manufacturer has a different idea as to what red, green, and blue are. There is no standard for that. Just like in the film days, people used to use a certain film because it had a certain color response. Unfortunately, digital cameras do the same thing. And you might even have two models of the same brand, or sometimes even two exact cameras that record color a little bit differently. So the custom profile works with the white balance. The white balance sets the neutral point. The custom profile then sets the colors in the 3D space around that gray point. So now everybody is working off the same starting point. Chris, if you bring up one of the color checker shots full screen, if you could just bring that
Yeah.
up.
Let's do this one
So if you
maybe.
guys look on the second row from the bottom, you'll see red, green, blue, or blue, green, red, and then CMYK. You see right there, you see the yellow, magenta, cyan, black. So those are standard lab space colors. So now every camera has the same reference set to start from. Now, just like cooking and just like Chris said to your tuning your guitar, you might want to add your own flavorings, and that's great. But what this does is it gives you a perfect starting point for all your images. And if you are shooting with multiple cameras, well, let's say you're a wedding photographer, you have a second shooter that has even a different brand of camera. If you each create profiles for your cameras, since they each have the same reference colors to start with, their color response is now going to match. You're then free to make your adjustments from there, but by using this, everybody is starting from exactly the same accurate point.
Yeah, I think that I mean that's pretty and that's I think Joe Brady's like amazing technical way of describing it. And I think my version is
Or
tuning my
I'll tell you what,
guitar.
when I come out to Santa Barbara in June, I'll bring a guitar with me and we can play. All
Okay,
right?
okay, that sounds
Deal.
fun. That sounds fun. But yeah, I'm with you too. I mean, especially that we do have so many different types of cameras, and it is amazing the differences that you get. And what I find too is like you said, it gives you a good starting point. Um, and maybe if let's just say if we're using the cooking comparison or something, it's kind of like having a clean kitchen and then cooking, versus it's a mess and you don't know where anything is, and it's just sort of like, this is good. Now I can do what I want to do. So for me, it's kind of key. I should throw in there too that there's times when it doesn't make sense to use this thing. So, for example, in this scenario, when we were doing these images, I don't want correct color at all, really. I want exaggerated, emotive, who knows what color. So in this case, I'm not going to have this guy hold the color checker chart for me across the way. So it isn't, at least in my workflow, and I don't know, Joe, you can respond to that too, there are occasions when it doesn't make sense to use.
Yeah, well, again, it's a starting point. I like to have a profile for each of my images, but the image you have on the screen right there, maybe you have a very early sunrise where things went very yellow. I don't want to change that. That's what I got up early for. So agree, color is somewhat subjective.
Right.
A couple of people did ask, is the color checker only a studio tool? No, use it for landscape too.
Yeah.
You'll find your skies are going to pop a lot more, particularly if for some reason blues are weakened from the Lightroom processing. One last question before I let you continue on, Chris. There's a lot of confusion about the ColorTrue app. For those of you that are asking about calibrating an iPad, this is something brand new. It was just introduced a week or so ago. X-Rite put it out. It's a free app. You do need to have one of the X-Rite calibrating devices, either an X-Rite i1 Display Pro, a ColorMonkey display, or an i1 Pro 2. And it allows you to finally calibrate your iPad. And technically, you can do. I actually did my iPhone too. I'm not sure why, but you can. It also does Android devices. So you can download the ColorTrue app for free on the iTunes store. It's actually listed under Pantone for some reason, but just search for ColorTrue. And for Android stuff like Kindles, it works. It's under Google Play. So go ahead and get it. If you've got one of those calibrating devices for your monitor, it'll work on your iPad now as well.
Yeah, and I think when you search for it in the iPad in the App Store, I think just ColorTrue is one word.
That's correct.
Isn't that
yes.
right, Joe?
Yeah.
Versus two.
That could be the confusion.
And then also, and then so just search one word, and obviously as the iPad becomes a more integral part of the photographic workflow, our color and accurate color on that device becomes more important. So a lot of this is the forward lean. You know, even with the Lightroom Mobile, I know there will be some people who complain it doesn't have this feature or that, and I am always thinking, okay, fine, but realize this is 1.0, and here's where we're going, and this is a helpful tool to extend what we're already doing, build upon something good, and make it better. And so I think ColorTrue fits into that forward lean, so to speak, at least for me in my workflow. All right, should I keep going, Joe?
Off.
Okay. Well, hopefully you guys are enjoying this and picking up a few tips here and there. There's so much that we could talk about with Lightroom, and what I'm trying to do is just give you a few things rather than overwhelm you with too much. Like Joe said, I have a ton of courses on this topic, but I'm hoping this is a little bit of a breath of fresh air and you pick up maybe some passion, excitement for using the tools, and then also some technical tips. So the next one, I want to look at a set of photographs. I was photographing this guy, Johnny, who has this really great beard, and I should actually see if I have the full set or larger set of pictures here. Let me just go to this. And to give a sense on the shoot, it was just meeting up with him at this local place in Santa Barbara, and going through, and you can kind of see some of the pictures. Some are processed, some aren't. But a lot of the ways that I try to capture images is by having a conversation with someone, and I like using environment and space as much as I can. And what I wanted to do is to look at some photographs that happened a little bit later in the shoot, and I love light when there are doors that you can sort of step into. So why don't I just go to this folder, and also kind of highlight this idea that, at least for me, I always have bad pictures before the keeper and bad pictures after it. So the good shots don't happen right away. But in this moment, I was photographing him here, and I didn't really like what was happening. And I noticed there was a doorway just off to our right, and so I said, hey, step into the doorway, and he took off his hat. That wasn't working for me, but I knew there was something here. And again, I'm just sort of digging or hoping that something happens. We're talking, excuse me, and again, the moment isn't really happening. I didn't really like the look yet, so I said, put on your hat. And sometimes with portraits, what I'll do is have the subject close their eyes or look away or take a breath, just kind of interrupt the flow. a little bit. In this case, he did that. And then for me, this shot here, what is the keeper? And it may not look like a keeper quite yet to you, but stick with me because I want to show you how at least I would process this image after I've found the photograph that's good. I'm also going to close the film strip below just so we can look at the image a little bit better. So first off, when I was shooting this, I was thinking black and white because I like that light that you get just inside of doorways or if you walk into a garage, and I like the feeling of that. I know it works really well in black and white. So here I'll go to the black and white tab, and I know skin tones are usually reds and oranges. I like to have bright skin tones, so I might do a little bit to brighten that up even before the basic panel. So sometimes I like to just sort of see what I can get with these sliders. We could do a little bit of blue if we wanted to mess with the shirt, maybe darken that a little bit. The image isn't close, isn't near where it needs to be, but it's a process. And I think committing to a process is so important. And also, not letting yourself be thrown off or disappointed if the original image, like this, doesn't look that good. I think as photographers, we have to have vision when we capture and then vision when we work on them. So I'm seeing past what this is to something else. Next up, I realized I need to crop it. So the R key, shortcut for the crop tool, and in this case, I'm just going to crop it up a little bit and change the composition here a touch, and maybe even a little bit of freeform crop there. So I'm just going to change that, double click to apply the crop. And what I'm looking to do is to make it really about his eyes, his expression, and I'm just trying to tweak the crop or find a good way to crop this. It's kind of hard to talk and to process your photographs if you ever tried to do that. And make it a little bit more balanced because it wasn't quite balanced when I was shooting it. There are purists who say crop on camera. I love that concept, but I've realized that isn't me. A lot of times I need to crop after the fact, and I have this great book which is called, it's put out by Magnum, it's called Contact Sheets, which shows the way people capture images and even the way they crop them. And so I'm always going back to that to say, sometimes you get it on camera, sometimes after the fact. All right, going in a good direction, basic panel. Rather than click on these panels, if you want to get good at Lightroom, you have to learn their respective shortcut keys. So on a Mac, it's Command 1. On Windows, that's Control 1 to open up the basic panel. And so in other words, to open up these panels by way of a shortcut, on a Mac, it's Command 0 for histogram, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. On Windows, that's Control. You don't have to remember the numbers. Just press Command or Control, then tap the number keys until you get to the panel you want to work with. And that way you'll teach yourself how to do that. And that allows you to work quickly so you can get creative and expressive. In this case, need some more contrast, so I'm going to bring up the contrast. Blacks I want to drop down, so I'm going to go ahead and darken the blacks. And then maybe add a little bit of clarity to kind of just add that little mid-tone snap to the image, and a touch of exposure. Now with the exposure, I want just a dash, so rather than dragging my slider, you can hover over the slider, and then what you can do is you can use your arrow keys. I'm using the up arrow key to just incrementally bring that up, or the down arrow key to darken the exposure. So that's just a nice way sometimes if you're like, I just want to tap that up a little bit. I like to do that. Okay, so far I think we're going in a decent direction. We're not close. We have quite a bit more we need to do. One is the area behind him is darker here, lighter over there. I want more darkness. A tool we could use to selectively edit the image would be one which allows us to create a shape. It's a radial filter. Let's click on that and open it up. With the radial filter, what you want to do is think about what type of effect you want to apply. Maybe it's darkening effect, and exaggerate it a little bit so you can see where it is. And maybe set your feather. So choose the effect, in this case lower exposure, bring up the feather. Since it's light, probably going to want higher feather versus lower. Lower would be a harsh edge, higher is going to be a softer edge. And then click and drag over what you want to do. In this case, it's sort of like we have this little flashlight illuminating the subject based on the shape. So here we can change the shape and move it around. And by having it exaggerated, I find it helps me really identify where I want that, and then I'll go back to my control and I'll modify it, maybe even bring it all the way out and then say, okay, how can I start to darken up this image in this way? And I think this is kind of looking a little bit more interesting. I think I'm going to need to recrop and do a few other things, but we're getting closer. Now, when you start to make adjustments, let's say you do exposure, maybe you also work on contrast, and then, I don't know, maybe you do something with the shadows and darken those up too. When you have multiple sliders that you want to scale back or up, collapse this whole panel by clicking on the triangle and go to your amount control here. With amount, you can control all three sliders at once, and sometimes this can really help you to find the right spot for what you want to do in regards to adjusting multiple sliders. This image didn't really need to do that, but I think it's important to highlight that as a good step when you're working on your images. All right, well, next, I want to get rid of the buttons on the shirt. I think those are distracting. So in this case, we'll go over for our tool, which is a spot removal tool. Click on that. In this one, we have a brush size. We have a feather amount, opacity. We'll leave all those up. My brush size, we can change with a slider. Or if you use Photoshop, you may know the shortcuts. Left bracket key makes it smaller. Right bracket key makes it bigger. So I'll tap the left bracket key and then just go down here to this part of the photograph, and I'll just tap on these to get rid of the bright area from that part of the picture, and then click Done to apply that. All right, so again, it's getting better. More that I would like to do is probably paint in with my adjustment brush. I got a little bit of a darkening effect up here. I'm going to move a little bit quickly because I'll assume that you know a little bit about the adjustment brush. It's a tool which allows you to paint in adjustments, whatever they are. In our sliders, we have exposure, we have contrast, clarity, sharpness, a lot of different things. Again, I'm just looking to create a little more drama. It feels like this type of a picture should be dramatic, you know. So I'm going to add some more darkening effect. A lot of times, when you get to work on a picture like this, you also want to zoom in and just get a feel for how am I doing and what is the picture looking like up close? Do I need to do any sharpening? It would be nice to do some selective sharpening on the eyes, right? So again, the adjustment brush, a great tool. Here, we'll just add some sharpness. I'll bring up the sharpness there and maybe paint in some sharpening into his eyes. I'll need to sharpen the whole image, but I want a little bit more in that area as well. And changing your zoom rate too can help you sometimes discover ways you might want to crop the image. Like the image here that could be a pretty interesting crop, even this type of a square that we have right now, or we could have another version like this. When it comes to versions, what we need to do is to open up the film strip below and create virtual copies. Virtual copies are so huge in Lightroom. If you're not using them, you have to use them. Command apostrophe is a shortcut to create one on a Mac. That's Control apostrophe on Windows. And with a virtual copy, I can then press the R key for my crop tool, and I'm going to create that tighter crop. And again, there's more that I want to do to this image, but I'm getting closer. I'm not quite there, but you get the idea, I think, of where we're going. So, you know, we had one image which started out like this. We cropped it. We processed it using a few different controls. Now we have another version of it. It looks like this, and from here we can maybe modify the crop a little bit more. So we have a different version of the same photograph. And by having different versions, it can give you unique ways to process the image. Maybe this one's going to have a lot of clarity in it, and even deeper blacks back there, you know, a little bit of a different feel and brighter skin tones, and has a different edge to it. So again, when you're doing your workflow, it's all about expression, right, and trying to come up with some way to use the tool to accomplish that. And hopefully you gained a few tips there, maybe some shortcuts. If I went too fast on any of this, they will be recorded, so you can go back and rewatch, or maybe you can also, you know, if you took down some notes, reference those. We will have some time for questions because we have a few minutes. In closing, mostly I just wanted to say thanks for joining me today. It's a real honor to get to share some of my passions with you. I have a ton of courses, as Joe mentioned, on lynda.com. It's a huge honor to make those and work with those folks. You can find them at lynda.com/Chris Orwig. So if you're interested, be sure to check those out, and you can get into some more of the details. And on that note, that wraps up the bulk of what I wanted to cover. And like I said, we can always do more, but I think it's a pretty good stopping point. Joe, any other questions that are coming through that would be worth hitting? And or if not, we can.
Sure, there's a couple that I think we should take care of. As I mentioned, I've continued typing while you were chatting. Somebody asked, is there a way to tap the exposure in increments smaller than 5 at a time?
Yeah, I don't know that. That's a great question. If anyone else is hearing the question and they have an idea,
okay,
I don't know.
This is going to go more into a stylistic thing than a Lightroom thing. But are there certain things that you look at that you feel an image is going to end up looking better in black and white than in color?
So the question was, sorry, because I was clicking there. Are there
certain aspects of an image that you find lend themselves perhaps better to black and white than color?
Yes, definitely. Images that I think that work really well, black and white, have what I would say often color can play. Let me just think of. Well, let's go to one of these. Let's go through some of these. I didn't do those photos, but we could. Let me go to this one. These colors will look horrible in black and white, I think. I don't know. I haven't processed them, but let's just try. Well, it's not that bad actually. But one of the reasons why I think it is color is kind of such an integral part to the picture. And when I'm shooting, maybe like with the guy Johnny or whatever the other pictures are, I'm really thinking about, well, I guess this color I'm guessing is going to look really good in black and white. And the reason is I think I like black and white photos that have a lot of contrast. So for me, contrast is really important, and having vivid contrast. Maybe like I think that's a lot better than the color version straight out of the camera. So when you have the ability to have that, and when the image isn't quite as complex, maybe even this one here too, it's not a complex portrait. So going black and white, I'm going to need to bring more light into the face there. So it doesn't quite work. It's not as good as that other one. But again, where contrast can really help you. Like I think this picture is a good example of that. And that's more preference and taste than anything. So maybe it's a subjective answer. But those are the black and white images that really resonate with me, is when the contrast, so the brightness value, maybe is what I mean, adds to the picture. Versus sometimes, have you ever had this happen where you remove color and the image just looks too complicated? Other images you remove color and all of a sudden the image becomes absolutely clear. And so for me, that's what I'm thinking about as I'm making that decision.
All right. A couple of people asked if you referred to a book. I missed it as well. I think something you mentioned something about.
Did I refer?
Oh dear. Contact sheets.
Oh yes. Okay. It's a book that's put out by Magnum, M-A-G-N-U-M. The book is called Contact Sheets. It isn't cheap, but what it will do is it will show like Henri Cartier-Bresson's contact sheet, and then, or one of my favorite photographers, Marc Rabou, who said photography is savoring life at 1/100th of a second. And it will show the contact sheet of these photos he captured of these people painting the Eiffel Tower, meaning the images, let's call it kind of like this. All of these aren't good, but then it shows the one that he thought was good. And the reason I love that book is it's this reminder of the process of photography for me, that every one of us have that same process. And I recently was spending time with this really famous photographer, and he was showing me his unedited work. And I was surprised that a lot of it wasn't very good. And it shouldn't have surprised me because it's true for all of us. We all have process. And so anyway, that was the book, and it's called Contact Sheets. It's a great resource.
Here's a big question, and I know a lot of people are confused about this.
Yeah.
Why should I use DNG versus my original camera RAW?
Yeah, that is a good question. So the DNG format, and I have some slides. I think it would be a little too cluttered to try to dig them up right now, and I also have some lynda.com movies about it if you really want to get into the technical things there. But here's why I do it in a very distilled way. The DNG file format is smaller, so that's really helpful. It's open source, meaning you have more flexibility with it versus camera proprietary. I think there are other things like, well, I'm kind of reaching for what the other reasons are because I've adopted it in my workflow so long ago, but I think those are some of the main ones. Yeah, I think those are some of the main ones.
I'm actually a recent adoptee.
You are, okay.
Myself. I'm very recent because I was shooting with a lot of different cameras, and I used the extension to keep track of what camera. It's just a quick visual. However, what I've found is, since I'm frequently transferring images from one computer to another, or maybe I'm giving it to my wife, or maybe I'm giving it to someone else, if you work with the original RAW file and you do a bunch of edits, Lightroom has to create a little sidecar file that has all that information, and that doesn't travel with the file. Where if you do it as a DNG and then export that file as a DNG to someone else, they get to see it with the profile, with the edits, with everything you've done to the file.
Yeah, exactly, and it can be all inside of that little container, and essentially that's what that DNG format is I think of it like a little Tupperware container where you can have your image and the profile alongside of it. So I think my response isn't very good, but if you're really curious and you're listening to this, email me and I can send you a more detailed reason. Like, here are the top 7 reasons, which I have. Again, I just don't have them. I'm not recalling them very well right now. But I think it is file size, it's flexibility, and consistency.
Well, plus if you're going to send that file to someone else, you're going to send it to somebody who wants to print it or wants to look at it in their copy of Lightroom. If you don't send them a DNG and you used a profile and all these edits, and you sent them the raw file, all that information's gone.
Yeah, exactly.
To me, that's the best part of DNG.
Yeah, and that over the long haul, that's going to ensure, a greater chance that the way you processed it will live on, so you don't lose those settings. Yeah.
I actually recently discovered one other real good use for DNG.
Yeah, what's that?
For those of us that still have iMac towers around, the original, not iMac, I'm sorry, the original Mac Pro towers. Okay. They've now gotten to the point where they will no longer support Lightroom 5.
Okay.
Because they don't have the processor. So OS 10.6.8 is your last operating system, and there's a lot of those Mac Pro towers around. And I shoot on a Sony Alpha 99, which requires Lightroom 5 because it's one of the newer cameras. However, if on your import you import to DNG, the DNG files are backward compatible to Lightroom 4.
Okay.
So that's a way that you can look at files from the brand new cameras on an older version of Lightroom if you happen to have one of those Mac towers around.
Very cool. So again, if I didn't answer your question about DNG, email me, and you can find my info just through Googling my name and my website, and it'll come straight to me, and I'd be glad to help out with that.
But Chris, it was so great to have you with us.
Yeah, and thank you. Great to be here. And the only thing I would add is if you have a particular topic that you would like to see for one of these webinars where you say, man, I wish the whole hour was on batch processing and that kind of a workflow where you're processing large groups of images, let me know, or whatever the topic is, because it's always good to know what's relevant, what would be helpful. This was a bit of hitting multiple little smaller topics. We could always go deeper into others. So if you have any of those ideas, feel free to send them my way. That would be fun to cover some of those as well. And Joe, great to get to have some time to chat, and thanks to everyone for joining us.
Chris, thank you so much for your time, and look forward to seeing you in June.
All right, sounds great.
Again, we'll send out a link when the recording is ready. So until then, everybody have a great weekend and be well. Bye-bye.